Hello, tonight I'm going to be talking about using mock screening checks with the children. So we're certainly likely to want to do at least one of these with children, either in the spring or summer terms before they actually sit the screening check. As much as anything, because sitting in a room one-to-one with an adult is something that's perhaps not part of their usual everyday routines at school, and some children can feel a little bit unnerved by that situation. So it's useful to know who those children are so that we give them the opportunity to practice something that maybe feels a little bit strange and a little bit uncomfortable. The other reason that we might want to be doing a mock check is that it enables us as teachers to pick up some useful information, again, from a situation that children aren't in routinely as part of their everyday school life. So it can flag up children who are really careful, perhaps unexpectedly so, and doing a really good job of sounding out very carefully. It can also flag up for us children who normally are very good at sounding out words, but just get into a rushing mentality, sometimes because they're not enjoying the actual situation itself and they just want to get through it. And sometimes those children can make very careless, silly mistakes that they might not normally make. Equally, sometimes children who are very good readers can do something totally unexpected when presented with a screening check, something that you couldn't possibly have anticipated. So it does give us some really useful information in that context. And certainly the children that flag up as having done something surprising or unusual, or children who've got very borderline scores, it's certainly worth doing a second mock check with them some weeks later to see if the same patterns are there, or whether things have improved, so that we know how to deal with that moving forwards. However, I am aware that some schools are choosing to start using mock screening checks in the autumn term of year one, and that's actually before the children have been taught all the graphemes which could potentially appear on a check. So if that's the case, there are going to be words, without a shadow of a doubt, that children aren't going to be able to sound and blend because they haven't yet been taught the graphemes that are in those words. So in fact, using a screening check at this point is going to give a slightly false impression of what the children can do, because a child, when presented with words that are within what they have been taught, may be able to get 90%, 100% correct, and suddenly you're presenting them with a check in which there is potentially quite a bit of stuff they haven't yet been introduced to, is getting a much lower percentage score, which may not accurately reflect how well that child is using what they've actually been taught. So my personal thoughts are on it that it's best to hold back and wait until the children have been taught everything that could potentially be put on the check. So that would be the end of Phase 5B in a letters and sound school, and it would be the end of Speed Sound Set 3 in a read write ink school, so that children at least have been introduced to and they have been practicing using those graphemes routinely before we are attempting to ask them to have a go at a check that may contain those. I'm also conscious that some schools are choosing to use the screening check as a way of steering their teaching. And whilst there are certainly things that we can pick up from the screening check that can be useful to us, they do tend to be the same things year on year. So, for example, we know that some children find reading the polysyllabic words on the last page difficult. So it's a good idea for us to be using lots of polysyllabic words anyway in a phonics lesson. We know that children find split digraph words difficult, often in the screening check, but actually split digraphs are something we know children find difficult anyway. So again, it's worth having those just as part of our regular phonics teaching anyway. We know that children often lose marks where there are CCs within a word, particularly where you've got a CC at the beginning and another CC at the end of a word. But again, those are the sorts of things that we're likely to be including within our teaching anyway. Identifying specific graphemes to work on as a result of what children have done with them in the screening check can serve a purpose to a certain extent, but bear in mind that any screening check does not contain all the graphemes, and therefore you may miss, if you're using that as your guide, you may miss other graphemes that weren't on that particular check that child is finding difficult and could encounter on another check and definitely need practice. So I always think it's best to use your own assessment system that's used in your school, that's got the graphemes on it that you're using in your phonics program, and that you have assessed on an ongoing basis, and you know you need to cover for particular children. That tends to give you a much better range of all the graphemes that need to be taught, rather than just the ones that were covered in any one check that you might have chosen to use as a mock. So screening checks certainly have their uses, but I think we don't want to overuse them, and I think sometimes our own assessment procedures internally can give us just as much useful information in terms of what informs our teaching moving forwards. And I certainly think that, particularly with Year 1 children, using them this term perhaps is not going to give us some of that useful information, as the children haven't yet been taught everything that might actually occur. Thank you for listening.